I'm Pradipta Mohapatra. I had the privilege 15 years ago to pioneer setting up of organized retail supermarkets in India. In fact, the first 100 supermarkets in India were set up by me. So today I'm called upon to ask, can we take a deep breath and look at what has India's organized retail achieved during the last 15 years. So the first thought that comes to me is that India's organized retail has moved far, far slower compared to what we had pioneers like us had anticipated 15 years ago. And one of the reasons why organized retail moved slower is not because consumers didn't want us. In fact, consumers were absolutely thrilled to see modern organized retail coming in. They felt very liberated. Survey after survey has told us that 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even today. The reason now, as we know, out of a dozen organized retailers, more particularly in the food and grocery space, only one has made money. And possibly several $1 billion have gone in investment. The reason for it, we realize today on stock taking, is that retail is a long-haul infrastructure business. It isn't good enough, as many early retailers thought, that once you set up the front room, retail will run perfectly fine. Retail is all about setting up the back room infrastructure, going right down to the producers. I think India was very daunted. Indian investors were very daunted in building a back room. What was 15 years ago is true today. 15 years ago, 25% of fruits and vegetables from the farm got rotted on the way and never reached the supermarket. Today, the situation hasn't changed at all. And why will it change? Excuse me. We haven't done nothing to make sure that this 25% goes down. We don't have a supply chain as yet. We don't have a cold chain as yet. We don't have aggregating centers at the farmer's end as yet. So this is hard business. Somebody need to be putting in several tens of billions of dollars in creating a good supply chain, more particularly agricultural and cold supply chain connected between the farmer and the supermarket. That alone will lead to farmer getting between 25 and 50% more money in his hands. So if you ask me, what's going to be the biggest enabler of farmers to benefit by getting 25 to 50% more money on his produce? The first one is an infrastructural connectivity between the front end of retail and the farmer who's sitting at the back end. We need to put money into it. And I think it is absolutely positive move that once for all, people like us and the government together has recognized that we don't have deep pocket enough to put in money in building infrastructure business. In my view, retail infrastructure is no different from road infrastructure, no different from power infrastructure. So if you have permitted foreign direct investment in building every other form of infrastructure, I see no reason why retail will not benefit out of it. That's point number one. Point number two, I am asked of the apprehensions that existed even 15 years ago, which is how will the kirana stores get affected when these things come in? I can certainly say not only this from experience of 15 years of having seen in a city which became the first good retail city for supermarket, namely Chennai. Now, I can tell you from experience that while dozen supermarket chains operate in the city, not one single kirana retailer has died. In fact, we have evidence to talk of otherwise. Let me now say, on my moving out of the retail business, and with similar concern as many people in the country have for employment and small business of kiranas, I co-founded an organization called Kirana First. The objective of Kirana First is really to do continuous research on what's the state of health of kiranas, how to drive efficiencies of kiranas to the next higher level, and how to make kiranas connected with large supply chains so that they benefit and pass on part of the benefit to the consumers. Kirana First has researched many areas and published many articles on the subject. Let me say, I don't want to take a name, but for taking a name, 15 years ago, Amma Nana store in the Adyar area of Chennai was operating on an 800 square feet store. It was a Kirana store. Today, Amma Nana is a 10,000 square feet size store. Amma Nana throughputs about 25 crores revenue in a year and makes 2.5 crore profit. Now, why did Amma Nana become the super Kirana that Amma Nana is? The reason being, Amma Nana actually soaked in all the modern principles of organized retailing, employed them into Amma Nana's own store, and continued to retain its customer centricity and has grown to that size. So is Murugan store, say for example, in Chennai. So are many of the stores. I can emphatically say this from my experience, that organized retailing has done more good to Kiranas than could have been imagined all by themselves. We have seen in last 10 years emergence of a very different class of retailers. Doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. I'm tempted to call them super Kiranas. These super Kiranas have gained out of the experience, and my organization Kirana First is committed to seeing how the Kiranas can actually be connected with the similar supply chain that big supermarkets have. You can ask me, are there similar examples in the world? Yes. India is not different as we think that we got over 1 million retailers. There are many countries in the world who have similar small retail infrastructure. Take South Africa, for example. Take Australia, for example. We have seen in 20 years or 15 years how Australian and South African Kiranas very gainfully have actually got plugged in to the basic infrastructure that got created by large retailers. We have every evidence to say that in India they are going to grow more prosperous. Finally, this subject of SME, the holy cow in India. I'm not going to get into debate by talking about what all we have done for the holy cow, how successful they have been or otherwise. We saw the first scare to SMEs in 91 when we opened the economy for the first time. Bombay Club actually said, you know what, whole lot of us must get protected for the next 10 years or maybe 20 years. Reality is, we have actually seen SMEs gain out of the process of liberalization. I have actually belief and deep belief, having seen the experience of 24 countries around the world, is that if really one set of people gain, other than the farmers, out of organized retailing, it is the small retailers. They get plugged into the supply chain of individual retailers. Let me take a case several years ago of second largest or the third largest retailer in the world. Once going around in Tesco's in the UK, I chanced upon a OTC product which is an antacid next to branded products like Gelusil. I asked the general manager, who buys your antacids and how were you able to get them? The general manager of Tesco replied to me by saying, you know what, we sell an identical product 35% cheaper. And you know what, we actually have 2 dedicated factories, one in Poland, one in Romania, who are exclusively committed to producing these antacid tablets only for our chain. And of course, we figured that Tesco imports its chilies on a 200-acre farm that Ghana's farmers develop for them. Yes, you can take a view that is retail a global business? Yes, it's tending to be a global business. But if there is benefit for our SMEs, it's not only to get plugged in to the retail markets here in India, but to get plugged in to the same retailers who are operating in other countries like Europe and UK and wherever else in America. We know this. Say for example, the largest supplier of basmati rice to Walmart, doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. That exists right here in this country in Punjab. So I think SMEs are likely to be hugely benefited, which they are actually not being benefited from the kiranas buying, because they don't have the muscle to take on the distribution. So I think large retailers are going to become the distributors. Summing up, and of course, I must touch upon employment. Now, the biggest source of lack of employment in this country are not the chartered accountant and the engineers who are coming out. Lack of employment and lack of employability are the kids who are not even school pass, who are dropping out of schools, who don't have great skill level to become engineers. Those are the people for whom we don't have jobs. Neither the government nor the private sector is capable of creating any jobs, and therefore we are talking about building skills. We know this. We know this all over the world, that for creation of first-line jobs, no industry plays a better role compared to the retail industry. I know India has followed that. I was responsible for starting the first management school for retail skills in this country, and I can tell you from experience, many of those first batch of school dropouts who came in are actually sitting as store managers and earning as much as business graduates will earn. That's what we have achieved over the next 10, 12 years. I completely believe that the 3, 4 or 5 million jobs that we're talking about being created is a reality. Finally, let's say India is a $1 trillion economy now. Anytime soon, it's going to be a $2 trillion economy. The retail business alone will be half that. What have we done till now? With 15 years of retailing, we haven't even scratched the surface. Time has come. We recognize retail as a serious player, a serious industry, and we treat it as part of everything else. And the scope of that only Indian owners must own it, I see no particular benefit in that, because Indian owners had 15 years and just didn't have enough investment ability to invest in the backroom. So I wholeheartedly welcome the idea of coming in. Lastly, if I may say so, the fear and the taboo that is raised that Chinese cheap imports will come in and fill up this place and shut down our SMEs. Well, if I'm an Indian and an Indian trader and an entrepreneur, what stops me importing all the Chinese goods? Why do we need a Tesco or a Carrefour to import Chinese goods? The reality is, Indians haven't taken to Chinese goods. The reality is that Chinese haven't produced goods that we Indians like. That's applicable for foreign retailer, that's applicable for us. And I think let's not ride the taboo that Chinese will come and inundate and flood our market. That is granting far less to our own entrepreneurs. I believe our entrepreneurs are competitive enough to meet the Chinese supply or any of the supply coming from anywhere else in the world.